So we'll get started. It's right at 2 o'clock right now. So thank you so much for joining us for our last webinar for our digital series for GEL here at the University of Arizona. My name is Dan Saipan. I'm the Director of Global Experiential Learning, or GEL. And what we try to do is we try to integrate travel, multicultural education, and service learning into diverse and inclusive programming offered to all of the U of A students and right now all of the world as well. Usually we're traveling all over the world right now, but we're offering these virtual programs for you that kind of span throughout the globe of important issues. And today we have a great topic that we're going to present on LGBTQ plus movement in Latin America. And we have guests that are joining us actually from Mexico City. So thank you so much. But I couldn't do this without my team of students. So I want you to introduce yourselves, please.
Hi, everybody. My name's Aries Castillo. I am a senior this year at the University of Arizona, majoring in criminal justice with the minor in psychology, and I am a GEL intern.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vanessa Madrid. I am a political science and public management and policy major, a senior here at the University of Arizona, and a GEL student intern.
Hello, my name is Leslie Soto. I am a current senior at the University of Arizona with speech, language, and hearing sciences as a major, and I am a current student intern for GEL. We as GEL want to acknowledge the land in which we sit upon. With that being said, we want to share with you this land of acknowledgement video.
Skikdash Wasajamai, Anian Upjigik, Amy Len Spotted Wolf, Aniapam Amjad, Judge Shaik, Wawik Eric Jikshan, Thanatam Joed. Annual Miss India in Arizona, 2020-2021. Good day. My name is Amy Len Spotted Wolf, and I come from the Fresno Canyon community in the Babikiwi district on the Thanatam Nation. I am a senior here at the University of Arizona studying elementary education under the Indigenous Teacher Education Project. I am Miss India in Arizona, 2020-2021. Samach Achmach An Thanatam Hajurika Dam Oyopo. We acknowledge our presence on the Thanatam ancestral lands. For time immemorial, the Thanatam have been part of this landscape and the University of Arizona. The rich history and connection the Thanatam have to the University of Arizona is visible in the land. The saguaro, agave, ocotillo, and creosote bush used to beautify the university campus are sacred plants to the Thanatam. The mountains that surround the University of Arizona and contribute to the advancement in the studies of the Southwest at the UA are the homes of our ancestors. Babatoag, also known as Mount Lemon, Chimamactoag, also known as Tumamak Hill, Toakuo, also known as Santa Rita Mountains, are just several of the many mountain ranges important to the Thanatam culture and identity. Our connection to the land is living and breathing in us here in Jikshan. We use this connection to the land and our ancestors to guide our studies at the University of Arizona. Tahugi, Sapa, thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa, for playing that video. Just to give you all a brief look into what we'll be discussing today. In this presentation, attendees will have the opportunity to take a deeper look into understanding the history of the LGBTQ plus movement in Latin America. Presenters will share cultural and historical aspects from pre-Columbian civilizations until recent activism. With that said, I would like to introduce you all to our panelists. Here we have Dr. Adrian Arroyo Perez. Dr. Adrian Arroyo serves as the Associate Director for Faculty Affairs within the University of Arizona Office of the Provost and is a faculty affiliate in Latin American Studies. Dr. Arroyo is a proud first-generation queer Latinx scholar and a UA Hispanic Serving Institutional Fellow. Dr. Arroyo earned a PhD in higher education from the UA Center for the Study of Higher Education with a BS in Chemistry and Pharmaceutical Sciences from La Salle University in Mexico City, where he was born and raised. Adrian completed a research internship in the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil in 2016 and has vast experience in international education in Latin America. He is part of the expert advisors of Visible Sonora, a Sonoran nonprofit that promotes LGBTQ plus rights and education in Mexico. Dr. Arroyo has received awards for his leadership and service, including the Global Excellence Award and the Leadership Service Award, in recognition of his excellent leadership in the name of social justice and LGBTQ plus liberation. Next, we have Dr. Ricardo Baruch Dominguez. Dr. Ricardo Baruch is a Mexican activist and researcher. His work focuses on sexual and reproductive health and rights. He has worked with numerous civil society organizations such as the Youth Coalition for Sexual and Reproductive Rights and the International Planned Parenthood Federation of the Western Hemisphere region. Dr. Baruch has a master's in public health and a PhD from the Mexican National Institute of Public Health. He has conducted research on LGBTQI plus people's health, HIV and STDs prevention, drug policies, and comprehensive sexual education. He is a contributor to some Mexican media outlets such as Animo Politico, Escandala, and Soy Homosensual. Thank you both for joining us today. We're excited to have you here.
Now I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much for having us here. I am really deeply excited about this presentation. I will start sharing my screen. First of all, I would like to thank Dan Sayapan and all his team, because this is the work that does in his office and in order for internationalization. My life, it has been, my professional personal life have been touched by that, and being able to present this topic that is very personal to me, but at the same time I have connections professionally. It means a lot to me. And also I would like to thank, and you know how much I am grateful for being along with Ricardo. Ricardo is one of the most prominent figures in Mexican activism for LGBTQ rights, and also health education and health in HIV and STDs in Mexico. So it is a great honor for me to be here with him. So as you could tell, we are going to present about the LGBTQ movement in Latin America, and Ricardo is gonna focus on Mexico, because of all the things and work and amazing activism that he has done in Mexico. As I was telling you, this is very personal to me. For those who have been in the beautiful sidewalks of Copacabana, that's the image I am showing. Those are the mosaics of the Copacabana beach by Burle Marx. He was one of the most famous landscapers in Brazil, and I took that picture when I had the chance to go there to do my research for my PhD. And those are my hand and the hand of my husband, who's Brazilian. So as you can tell, this is very personal to me. I am sharing this because all the things that we are going to talk about have impacts in people's life, direct impacts on people's lives. If it wasn't for some of the legislation that I will talk about, I couldn't be here living with my husband, who's Brazilian, and I am Mexican, and now we live in the US. So there are many constituencies that had to be aligned for us to be living a happy life and a life together. Then in other time, in very recent times, we could not have the privilege to live. But aside of my own personal story, why is this important as an institution such as the UFA? As you know, the University of Arizona recently was designated as a Hispanic serving institution. And some of the critiques of some scholars, for example, Angel Gonzalez and Yolanda Cataño, who I am working on some study with Yolanda about servingness for queer Latinx students in Research One institutions. So I am very glad that I can cite them in my presentation. So they have critiques on how institutions demonstrate servingness around and for queer Latinx students, right? So this continues to transpire, especially when talking about our population. And some other studies have identified the queer, Black, Indigenous, and people of color as a target and higher risk for distress due to the marginalization of our multiple identities. We not only navigate in educational spaces based on systems of oppression and whiteness, but also at the same time within our own community. Sometimes we have to face double discrimination because of the homophobia, for example, right, within our communities. This is also important because higher rates of attempt suicide has been demonstrated for Latinx students. For example, in 2011, Harrison Quintana made a study and he found that 47% of transgender Latinx students have attempted suicide. This is very high. This is a very high number, where 77% of them experience harassment, leading to 21% of students who identify as a transgender Latinx had to leave the school. This is very important. This is why this is very important, because this still affects the life of students with these identities. And one of the things that also adds on importance is because, as I told you before, the familial cultural differences between white and Latinx students underscore the need for support that cater specifically to Latinx communities. And as I got advice from Dan, I'm going to promote a class that I will be giving next year for Latinx, for QTPOC students in STEM. So that will be offered through the College of Science. And this is one of the examples in which we can make actions that can advance the support for these communities and this specific group of students. This reaffirms what I've been telling you. This example, this presentation is one of the other reasons this is important. For so long, the US curriculum in education has denied the right for us to know our own history or know and the history of our ancestors. So this is why we are bringing this presentation and telling you about the histories of our own people. Maybe your parents or your grandparents came from these regions, from any of these countries. And it is important that we know where we come from to know where we are going. But not only our past, but all the things that are going on in this particular region, who I love and I think it is very important. You will see how the LGBTQ movement has developed. And I wanted for next, I wanted to make a purposeful connection between the things that we live here as communities of color in the United States and what has to do with our origins or with Latin America. And you know, one of my favorite feminists and intellectuals is Gloria Anzaldúa, and I'm going to read this citation from her that I got, that I think exemplifies very well that bridge that I am trying to connect and to gather your attention on how and why this is important. She said, and she wrote, "Made, mad, and sexually different people were believed to possess supernatural powers by primal cultures, magical religious thinking. For them, abnormality was the price a person had to pay for her or his extraordinary gift." She obviously referred to sexual identity, and she is one of the most prominent scholars. And another connection that I want to make is that at times I will be beginning to present on pre-Columbian cultures. And at times the language used now is heavily peppered within the language of postmodernism. We need to understand that many of the ideas that we have about the LGBTQ movement and also even the terms, the definitions, concepts are highly embedded in the language of postmodernism, and that doesn't necessarily represent what our ancestors thought or thought about it. So those are the ways that we manage those terms, those terminology, and even in theoretical frameworks. We are going to challenge them, and I ask you to be open to challenge those orthodox westernized perspectives of sexuality. So coming full to beginning on explaining some of the aspects of sexuality in pre-Columbian civilizations is that I am showing you these images. One was found in Guatemala. It belongs to the Mayan culture, and it shows two men. And the one in the middle, it was found in Peru. And I am showing you also the book of La Verdadera, de la Historia Verdadera de la Conquista de la Nueva España, because many of the things that we know, of the knowledge that we get, was told by the Spaniards. But that again, their vision was very westernized, and that doesn't necessarily represent what was happening. And I would give an example. For example, in the Yucatec Maya, the male homosexuals were not a disruptive and non-complementary element of society. Rather, they fit into pre-existing gender constructions that viewed them as essential participants in gender schemes based not on linear male or female dualities, the way that we know it today, or in a Westernized point of view. That was not the case for them. Rather, they were the individuals who possessed these characteristics. They were multifaceted sexualities. And this came from deities or gods and mortals as well. So this gives us a sense of how different the conceptualization of gender identity, for example, they had in the past. And this is very close to what nowadays we may know as non-binary. And non-binary refers to individuals who identify as neither man or woman, both man and woman, or a combination of man and woman. It is an identity term which some use exclusively, while others may use it interchangeably with other terms, such as gender queer, gender creative, gender non-conforming, gender diverse, and other names. So this is our modern conceptualization of what some civilizations in Latin America before the Spaniards and Portuguese came already had and managed in their societies. And now I'm going to transport you to one of my favorite places in Mexico, which is the National Museum of Anthropology. And not only in Mexico, but in the world. If you have the chance to go, this is a phenomenal place. And now I'm showing a picture of Xochipilli. There was in the Museum of Anthropology an exhibition of this god, which was found near the volcano Popocatépetl. And why am I showing you this? Because this is very important. I'm gonna talk about the Mexican and queer Aztecs. For this civilization, the source of the universe was Ometeotl. That meant two gods. So being a female and male that was conceived of a single entity and two distinct beings simultaneously. And so they didn't think about, for example, many of the westernized religions had a man as God, but that wasn't the case for the Mexican. And from this god, Ometeotl, emanated other dual identities. And significantly, the image I was showing you is Xochipilli and Xochiquetzal, often called siblings, and they had this gender fluid being. And so this is very important to understand the conceptualization and cosmovision of this civilization. And this god was the patron of queer folks, and also the not procreative sex, leisure, pleasure, and fun. Something also that I want you to understand, this is an image of Tenochtitlan before the Spaniards came. As you can see, it is a very big territory with, I am showing this one that shows some of the cities that the Tenochtitlan Empire had. It was a big empire. So, and by the way, it shows Azcapotzalco, where I am from. So it is uncertain and inaccurate to impose our modern conceptualization of gender identity and sexual orientation on the Mexican or Nahuatl, because we're pretty sure these perspectives were not the same, especially when you have a vast territory and a vast group of peoples. If we remember, they themselves colonized a lot of peoples in Mesoamerica, right? So the same way here, for example, in the United States, many groups have different conceptualizations of sexuality. That was the same case for the Mexicas. So we have two forms of knowledge, right? There are reports from Spanish conquerors of punishment for same-sex sexual practices and transgender behavior. But at the same time, we have reports of queer folks deeply incorporated into social structure, temples, armies, and families. So this means that we should not keep just one conceptualization, which is generally what the Spanish told us about these groups. But since they were formed of many groups of people, there were different conceptualizations. And now I want to talk to you about something very, very fast, which is the Xochihua and the Patlache. So these two terms are very interesting, and you're gonna find out why. So Xochihua is in Nahuatl, the suffix EH and HUAH can be added to stems to create a word that means owner or possessor. So these words, Xochihua, Xochitl means flower, and Wa is possessor, right? So it means the possessor of flower. So what does this mean? The term refers to a person assigned male at birth who behave in ways associated with those assigned female. And why flower? And this is very beautiful, and I really like this conceptualization. In Nahuatl poetics, it's a robust metaphor for all things beautiful, and also stands for pleasure and for femininity. So they were not only referring, for example, to sexual preference, but it was a broad conceptualization, a spiritual conceptualization of these individuals. That, as I was telling you, ranges from men who had sex with men to cross-dressing and to trans women. So Xochihuaque meant a group, all these different people. And the same we have for masculinity. Patlache is a possessor noun, and it literally means the possessor of Patlachli, which is related to ideas of masculinity. I'm gonna go very, very fast into the colonial era, because as we know, the Spaniards and Portuguese brought all their ideas. Nevertheless, they failure both the Catholic Church and the colonial state to eradicate what they call sodomy. And Grusinski made three important conclusions about this period in time: that urban networks of men who sought out of other men for sexual relationships did exist in the colonial period, that these men did not live in fear despite sporadic yet harsh repression and punishment. And this was very related to the social class, as it is nowadays. Those in higher spheres of society were not, or some of them were not punished. But how is the progress now? How progressive is LGBTQ rights legislation in Latin America? And this is also another picture that I love. This is the Paulista Street, and this is the Museum of Art. And I don't know if Ricardo has this data also, but I think the Sao Paulo Pride Parade is the largest in the country. But this is a beautiful image that I just wanted to show you. And so despite that—
The largest in the world.
Right, in the world, yes. Thank you. So despite Latin America being known as mostly Catholic and very conservative, we also are home to some of the most progressive legislations. And I'm going to explain some of the countries, and Ricardo will focus on Mexico, since we have a lot of relationships. And I wanted to show, because I love Latin America and our culture and food, I'm going to show, instead of flags, I'm going to show meals, traditional foods of all of these countries. But first, in January 2018, a ruling by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights signified that signatories of the American Convention on Human Rights were obliged to legalize same-sex marriage, which was a significant step forward the LGBTQ rights in our region. And so there were countries that are working on it that had not that legislation yet, such as Bolivia, Peru, and Paraguay. So for Argentina actually became the first country in Latin America to legalize same-sex marriage in 2010. And this is great because they have one of the world's most comprehensive transgender right laws. In Buenos Aires, for example, in 2018, they passed a mandate which stipulates that at least 1.5% of public employees must be trans. And that image is a choripan, which is delicious. And for Brazil, despite current President Jair Bolsonaro's attitudes toward homosexuality, he has made awful and horrible comments against our community. Brazil has one of the world's most advanced legislations regarding LGBTQ rights. Same-sex marriage has been legal since 2013, and in June of 2019, the Supreme Court decided to criminalize homophobia and transphobia. Nevertheless, I have to say that Brazil has been one of the world's most unsafe places for LGBTQ due to the alarming high numbers of LGBTQ phobic attacks, specifically against transgender women. And that's a acarajé. That's something really delicious. It's a meal that is very complex to explain, but you can find that in Bahia. My husband is from that region, so that's a very delicious meal. And now,
I think we're experiencing some technical difficulty. Let us try to work this out and we'll be back with you in a second.
Hi, so it wasn't me. I thought Adrian stopped.
Yeah, we can, maybe Vanessa, can you put your screen up, your share screen with the presentation, please?
Yes. You'll have to remind me what slide he was on.
Maybe number 20.
I see it as slide 30 under Colombia.
Okay. Bueno, ahí está.
Well, if you want, I can start with mine, and then maybe Adrian can finish once I'm done, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So thank you everyone for being here, and thank you to the University of Arizona for the invitation. As they said at the beginning, I work for IPPF-WHR, which is one of the largest and oldest organization working on sexual and reproductive rights, including LGBTIQ rights. In our case, in particular, in the Western Hemisphere region, which means the Americas, including Latin America and the Caribbean. And I've been working for a long time with the LGBTQ plus movement in Mexico. So this is what I want to talk about with you this afternoon. So sorry, I see that Adrian is back. So I wonder if you want to finish with the couple of slides that were left, and then I can move on.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I think my internet got just disconnected me. I think I was just explaining Ecuador. I think it was Colombia.
Sí.
If you let me share my screen, I cannot do it now.
Yes, of course.
Thanks for backing up, Ricardo. Well, in Colombia in 2016, Colombia's constitutional court legalized same-sex marriage and the right to adopt in 2015. And I was saying that there was a very interesting movement led by some influencers that made, to the end, Juan Manuel Santos, the president of Colombia at the time, sign a decree to prevent discrimination based on sexual orientation. Ecuador is the most recent Latin American country to legalize same-sex marriage after a closely contested constitutional court ruling last year. And I'm gonna go fast because I really want Ricardo to talk about his experience. And finally, Uruguay was named the most LGBTQ-friendly country in Latin America in 2016 by America's Quarterly. They have a great model of inclusion. Uruguay was also the first Latin American country to introduce civil partnerships in 2008, as well as the first in the region to legalize adoption by homosexual couples in 2009. And they have a great support also for the trans community.
Quick thing, the slide is not proportioned. It's chopped off a little bit.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah, it'll work. Thank you.
And so finally, the same law stipulates that 1% of all government employees must be trans. And now I know Ricardo was already talking. I'm sorry, I got disconnected, but he's gonna talk about the LGBTQ movement in Mexico. Please welcome Ricardo.
Thank you again. Cool. So I think that you, Adrian, just mentioned like very briefly like how many of the countries in Latin America have very advanced legislation and policies regarding LGBTIQ people, and there are actually different analyses that show that only after Western Europe, Latin America and the Caribbean is one of the regions where there's more official recognition of LGBTIQ rights, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's a very friendly region to live in if you're LGBTIQ+. And I'm gonna tell you a little bit of why. Adrián, la pantalla no está completa, no sé si la puedes, o sea, estamos viendo como el presentation mode.
¿Así está mejor?
No, I think it's better how it was before. It's just that for some reason we cannot see the edges of the slide.
Así tampoco.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, okay. Perfect. So first of all, let me say that the history of most Latin American countries regarding the LGBTIQ movement it has a lot of similarities, particularly because most of our countries had a very strong presence, for example, of the indigenous cultures, as Adrian was saying, but also of the Catholic Church during the Spanish colony, and well, in the case of Brazil, of the Portuguese colony. And during the 20th century, it became more visible, depending in which country, that there were some movements and some small organizations of people who were like coming together and actually like try to make visible the issue of homosexuality, and not just from a point of view, for example, of like sex work or other like bad things associated with the LGBTIQ community, and not because sex work is bad, but I'm just saying that it was kind of, for a lot of people, it was like kind of like, oh, if you're gay, if you're homosexual, then you're a sex worker, or you're a pedophile, or you're a criminal. So in a nutshell, you're basically a bad person. But for example, in Mexico, the first big moment when there was like a lot of public discussion about homosexuality was actually in 1903, which is the year where there was something called El Baile de los 41, or like the Ball of the 41, which was like a party that was raided by the police, and where basically half of the attendants were like men dressed as women, and the other half were men dressed as like in a masculine way. And one of those attendants of the ball was actually the son-in-law of the president. So it was a huge scandal. Actually, there is a movie right now in Mexico City showing in the theaters. I'm gonna share with you the link of the trailer in YouTube in case you want to watch it here in the chat. And then homosexuality was never criminalized in Mexico, but there were other crimes such as like faltas a la moral, which means being unmoral. I'm not sure how to say it in English. So for example, during the 60s, a lot of like small clubs and bars were becoming like places where homosexuals were gathering, and a lot of police brutality was happening at that time. So then with Stonewall in 1969, many countries in Latin America heard about what happened. So they started organizing and waiting for the right moment to come out. So in the case of Mexico, it was actually in 1979 that the first public demonstration of the Movimiento de Liberación Homosexual, at that moment, it was not LGBTIQ, it was not gay, it was like Liberación Homosexual was the main topic. And they decided to do that demonstration for the anniversary of the Cuban Revolution, because most of the people who were part of the movement were actually communists and socialists and members of different like labor organization and a few others. So like the left and the LGBTIQ movement were really close together at that time. So then the movement at that time was also like really strong among, for example, like a lot of gay people from the city with like university education, and a few lesbian women, and of course a lot of trans people. But there was also this separation because the trans people were mostly, for example, sex workers or entertainers, while the gay men were like people who were like going to school, going to university, and a few other things. So like there was not a lot of cohesion. So what brought, to some extent, what brought the cohesion to the movement during the early 80s was the HIV pandemic, because similar to what happened in other countries, including the US, but also the majority of countries in Latin America, some of the most affected populations by the HIV pandemic were gay men and trans women. So when the HIV pandemic came up, like the movement was really new, was really young. So like they were just starting to come out from the closet when HIV came, and therefore there was a lot of stigma towards LGBTIQ people, but particularly gay men and trans women. So in the next slide, please. Yeah, so at the same time, like during the 80s, like the civil society started creating organizations, like started coming together because they knew that in order to make some changes, they had to show that there was like some like numbers and power in the streets and all that. And that just happened not only in Mexico City, but also in other big cities around the country, including Guadalajara, Monterrey, Tijuana, and a few others. As usually happens in many countries, gay men dominated the scene. So it was like, okay, the homosexual movement was mostly dominated by cisgender men. But of course, there were other organizations that also gained some visibility eventually. And also, I'm talking a lot here about HIV because the movement in Mexico and many countries in Latin America actually grew to some extent because of the HIV epidemic. So for example, some of the people who would be demanding LGBT rights were the same people who were demanding access to HIV treatment, and were the same people who were asking access to comprehensive sexuality education. So in that sense, like the whole sexual and reproductive rights movement was very united through because of the HIV pandemic in many of our countries. The next one. So like the first demands of the LGBTIQ movement in Mexico were, for example, to some extent, to stop the police harassment, because like people at that time were not thinking about like, oh, we want to get married or we want our legal identity to be recognized. At that time, people were saying, we want to go out and drink and have sex without people telling us what to do and what not to do. So similar to what happened to some extent in Stonewall. So like we wanted to party, we wanted to go out and we wanted to be able to be ourselves, even if it was just at night in a bar or a club or something like that. But eventually those demand like became like brought other things into the basket, including, for example, anti-discrimination laws, strategies to prevent HIV, but also to give HIV treatment. Let's not forget that in most countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, there was no treatment available until the early 2000s for most of the people. Like a few people had access in the late 90s, but at that time, a lot of people from our communities were dying of AIDS. So that's why like there was a lot of push from our movement for access to prevention, for testing, and of course for treatment. Then there was this recognition, the need of recognition of same-sex couples. At that time, people were not talking that much about marriage. Like in Mexico, the first like legal figure that we had a couple called Pactos de Solidaridad, like Solidarity Pact, and the other one called Sociedades de Convivencia, and which means like, well, we are together and we the state recognizes that we want to be together and we share some rights, but definitely those rights were not the same of those of a married couple. And also this discussion about the legal identity for trans people began. And of course, like the fight against homophobia and transphobia was really important also at that time. But because even now, when someone, for example, from trans community is killed, like it's very often the media or the judicial system say like, oh, it's probably one of her lovers who killed her, or it was probably she was involved in some issue of drugs or something. But there's not official recognition in many states that transphobia exists, and that is a reason for which a lot of people get killed. Anyway, so there, like the demands have changed throughout the time, and right now there are like different things. For example, same-sex marriage, of course, but also the recognition of intersex rights, which is something that not all over Latin America there's discussion about intersexuality. Only like I would say like the big countries have like an intersex movement, including, for example, Argentina, including Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, but some others still do not include that much the intersex rights and needs in the discussion. There's also the demand for treatment for people living with HIV, because even though there's, in theory, there's universal access to care for everyone, this year in particular, there have been a lot of problems with the distribution of HIV medication, which has created a lot of issues and has shifted the work that a lot of LGBT groups were doing for LGBT rights to shift for demand access to HIV medication. Also, there has been a lot of discussion about comprehensive sexuality education and how the education at schools should include LGBTIQ issues and talk about sexual diversity to try to stop homophobia in schools and so on. But at the same time, this fight has actually brought a huge monster that we did not expect, that the ultra conservatives brought to the table, called the gender ideology. So this issue of gender ideology, that it's like a new concept that these people created, it's basically to say that we LGBT activists want to bring homosexuality to the schools and make everyone to be a transgender and show your kids how to masturbate and things like that. And of course, those are crazy ideas, but unfortunately, they resonate a lot with certain groups of people. So that's why like things are again becoming very complicated for us, because let's say that we were going in a good direction every time, making good progress for recognition of our rights, but that suddenly, like 3 or 4 years ago, this whole concept of gender ideology comes, and a lot of people believe in the fake news and all that, and what they see in the social media, and then all of a sudden they don't want us anymore. And of course, there's also like the fight for the recognition of trans kids. The next one. So then the situation of LGBTQI rights in Mexico, it's kind of okay in the paper, as I was saying. So for example, even the Constitution talks about like that all citizens, regardless of their sexual preference, have all the rights that the Constitution includes. We have federal and state laws against discrimination. We have same-sex marriage in most of the states. Here, I would like to mention that, for example, like anyone in any state of the country can actually get married, but if you're married, if you want to get married in a state where it's not legally recognized by the law, you have to actually do an adjunction to the Supreme Court. So it takes time and it takes money. So for example, here in Mexico City, I can just go to the civil registration place and say, I want to get married with my boyfriend. But if I was living just like 5 kilometers from here in a different state, which is called Estado de Mexico, where it's not included in the law, they will say I would have to go through a complicated administrative process. So 14 states at this point do not have same-sex marriage, including Sonora, because I know that there's a lot of exchange between Arizona and Sonora. And Sonora is one of the states where like the legislators and the governor, who's a woman, has been trying really, really hard to stop all the efforts to legalize same-sex marriage. Then legal gender identity is only proven in 10 states, which is also kind of like complicated because, for example, if you're a trans woman living in a different state, then you cannot, or a trans man, you cannot get official recognition. So as I was saying, like it's not that bad, but it's not optimal. Next one. And then what's the real situation of LGBTIQ rights? So for example, we're the second place in the world, just after Brazil, in homotransphobic killings, which is really, really terrible because, well, as you know, there are many parts of Mexico that are really violent and there's a lot of crime, but that includes a lot of violence towards women and towards trans people in particular. There's a lot of LGBTIQ phobia in schools and workplace and the streets and everywhere, which like unfortunately like that shows a lot in many of them. In Mexico, we have this institution called the National Council to Prevent and Eliminate Discrimination, and they organize some surveys, like national surveys, like huge surveys every 3 or 4 years. And in the last one, it shows that the people who are most discriminated against in Mexico are people living with HIV, just only followed by gay men and lesbian women. So it shows how strong the LGBTIQ phobia is. Also, the fact that there's not a lot of political participation. For example, I was reading about like how many like members of the Congress and senators and members of the municipality councils and all that in the US you have now. But here in Mexico, it's very, very, there are very, very few openly gay or lesbian or trans people in political positions, which is really bad. Because also there's like a division of civil society and political parties. So there has not been a lot of communications among them. And as I was saying, there's a new ultra-conservative wave. So for example, we always had a conservative organization or a political party called PAN, Partido Acción Nacional, but they were kind of like, okay, like, don't get married, but if you want to exist, just exist. But now we have this new party, which is actually based on a lot of evangelical ideologies. So they are actually like, oh no, homosexuality is a sin and you have to change, and we want to promote conversion therapies, and we want to avoid all mentions of sexual diversity in schools. So that's something that a few years ago we did not have. And now, because of like these ultra conservative movements coming from other parts of the world, including the US with all this whole Trump discourse, but also, for example, with Bolsonaro in Brazil and some other prominent conservative figures in Latin America, like we are struggling right now with that issue. Next one, I think it's the last one. Yeah. Yeah. So basically, like what I wanted to share with you is the fact that there is a strong movement, not just in Mexico, but actually in most of the countries in Latin America, pushing for the legal for the recognition of LGBTIQ rights. But it's not the same in all countries. For example, if we take a look of what's happening in Central America, the situation is really different, because even though homosexuality or being trans is not illegal in any of the countries of the continental Americas, with the exception of Guyana, like that doesn't necessarily mean that there's no that things are okay for us. For example, there are a lot of migration right now from LGBTIQ people from Honduras, from Guatemala, from El Salvador, who come to Mexico trying to cross to the US, because the situation of the gang violence and the narco traffic and all that is so bad in Central America that they just really need to get out of there. And there's also a lot of problems in other countries, for example, in South America, where there's like a lot of like these also like very homophobic forces in the politics, including, for example, Paraguay or Peru or Bolivia, where they're like openly super homophobic or transphobic politicians, which is something that they were not there before. So then, to some extent, like a few years ago, we thought that we were winning the battle, the ideological battle, and also the legal battles for our rights. But now we see a clear threat to that. So in that sense, we need to come together, and we need to create new alliances as well, not just with civil society organizations, but also with academia, with the media, with even with the religious organizations, and of course with the governments, in order to make sure that our rights are respected. Today is Human Rights Day around the world, and I think that it's a very good moment to remember that we still have a long way to go, and that we all need to work together, no matter where we are. That's if that's like a university, or that's a government institution, or that's an NGO or whatever. We all have a lot of things to do. So, anyways, like I appreciate your attention, and I'm really happy, again, as I said, like for the opportunity of being here with you all.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time for both of you to share your experiences with us. So we have one question that came in. I know, Adrian, you replied, but just if you want to expand on it more, it says, so jumping off that mention of gender ideology, I'm a white teacher of Spanish language and culture and teach to a widely white audience of American teenagers. I think it is important to at least expose my students to the aspects of Latinx American culture that have been discussed during this presentation. I know for a fact that even a mention of these topics will get a huge amount of pushback from parents and administrators. Are there any organizations that would protect or advocate for teachers who talk about these topics in the classroom? Or any recommended resources teachers can use in the classroom to talk about these topics in a way that can put these parents or administrators at ease?
I don't know if you would like to add some, Ricardo. I posted the website, the Save Zoom project, which has very specific trainings in regards to topics within our community, and it explains very well what's gender identity, sexual orientation, and it has manuals very well designed for the trainers and also for the trainees. That's a very good and nice resource. And it's for free, and you can download all the materials.
Great. Okay. And so another question we have for you all is, what do you feel is more progressive, the Latin American movement or the movement here in the United States?
Well, I would say it's complicated because also we need to recognize that there is not just one movement. There are actually like many different movements, and for example, during my presentation, I was trying to like keep them all together. But the reality is that there are like many different movements. So, for example, there are like these very leftist, anti-homonormative collectives and organizations that are against, for example, same-sex marriage. And they are out there demonstrating and and demanding like reproductive freedom and reproductive justice and economic justice, which is something, for example, that maybe the mainstream LGBT movement are not necessarily asking for, because we're trying to pass the laws of same-sex marriage. So I'm not saying that one of the or the other is bad. It's just like it's very complex, and each country also has their differences. And I see that in the US, there's also a presence of a lot of this diversity, like from the radical anarchist queer movements to like very established pro private sector movements. So like, which is something that it's also common here. I would say that in many of the countries in Latin America, the movement is still attached mostly to leftist political views, which so in that sense, I think that could be a difference.
Thank you for touching on that. Another question we have is, what can we take from the Latin American movement that we can utilize in the US movement?
I think something that Ricardo just mentioned, and that there are different movements and and how sometimes they are unified. I think that's something that can be retaken into the USA. As I was explaining earlier, our region is very diverse. We combine in this presentation all of the advancement of all of these countries. But something that I really like about ours is that some of the unified and how we come together as people. It's something that I have not seen in the USA. There are very specific movements in the USA, and there are examples of how great that has been for other countries. But what I do see in Latin America is that when we want something, we go out to the streets and we protest and we get involved. And that advocacy and energy I would like to see here.
Sorry, I have to leave now, but I really appreciate the space, and I hope that we can collaborate again in the future. So thank you, Adrian and Aries and Dan and everybody who was involved in this event. So I think that you'll stay just for another couple of minutes, but I just want to say goodbye and thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Thank you, Ricardo. You're great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adrian, for sharing this insight with us. It's important that we have these conversations. Next, I'll hand it over to Vanessa. She's going to give our closing remarks and updates about our post-assessment.
Thank you, Aris. So again, thank you so much to the speakers for coming out today. We really much appreciate, GEL appreciates you taking your time out of your day to talk about these very important topics. So I do want to give a reminder. My screen will move. There you go. The post-assessment can be accessed by taking a picture of the QR code, and we will also be sending out an email with the link pretty soon. So please take a moment to take out your phone and scan the QR code, and note that it is due December 17th for attendance credit. And please follow us on our social media accounts. Just a heads up, we have our recorded webinars on our website if you ever want to return to any of our old events that we've had in the past week or in the past. But yeah, thank you.
And thank you so much again, Dr. Arroyo and Dr. Dominguez, for this great presentation. I encourage you all, Dr. Arroyo is going to have a class next semester, so if this information is interested to you, which is super interesting, please join his class. I think there's still some openings, maybe. hopefully. So thank you so much for joining us for this great topic. This is our last webinar of 2020. It looks like we're going to continue this on for next semester. So we're going to have kind of the same format for you all next semester, 3 different webinars each month, explaining different topics from cultural to service learning to international topics, current topics that are out there. And like I said before, usually we're not virtual and usually we're traveling the world. So we want to continue that. So we hope that everybody has a safe holiday and everybody can mask up and social distance themselves so we can travel in the future. So thank you so much for joining us once again, and we'll see you next year. Thank you.